Okay.
I'm Sheryl Fields Bogan. Today is January 19th, 2009, and I have the greatest honor to interview my father, Leo Fields, for Dallas Jewish Historical Society and our family records. Dad, I'm going to move over here, and I'm looking forward to interviewing you.
Thank you. I'll get
I
your tip
love
on
you.
me.
Dad, let's start at the very beginning. Let's start with your parents. Could you please tell us the names of your parents and a little bit about their background?
My father was William Feilschmidt,
Could you spell that?
Feilschmidt, and he was probably born in Austria, as I recall. I never knew him because he died when I was 8 weeks old, and I was raised by my mother. My mother was Mamie Lipsche Feilschmidt, and this was 1928, September 14th, 1928. It was the beginning of the Depression, and so being a very poor family, she found a job in Amarillo with her brother-in-law and put me in the care of my grandmother. So I really never knew my mother until maybe I was 12 years old. I'd see her occasionally, but never really got to know her until she moved from Amarillo to Wichita Falls.
So she put you in the care of your grandmother in Wichita Falls, and your grandmother's name was?
Sarah Lipsche.
So she put you in the care of your grandmother in Wichita Falls, and she was living in Amarillo. How did your father die?
Sheryl, I think he died of one of the pandemics that were spreading around the world. I had no idea, but the doctors told me that had they had penicillin, they would have saved his life. But he was in the hospital for quite a while, they told me. In fact, they said at one time we were in the hospital together, which I don't recall at all. Just repeating it to you.
You were in the hospital together. You were a sick child?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I
Oh.
have no idea.
And what did your father do?
My father worked for a retailer in Wichita Falls. And of course I know nothing about his background other than that. I do know that he served in the Navy in World War I. I have a picture of that. And I know absolutely nothing about him at all.
Okay. And your mother was born where?
In Boston, Massachusetts.
In Boston.
One of the suburbs.
How did she happen to be born in Boston?
I think that's probably where the ship landed.
Okay. And she was one of how many children?
I want to say 10 or 11. Is that right, Bobby?
No.
9.
I think it's 7.
No,
One died, you know.
Oh, okay. Okay. And so you were raised in Wichita Falls until?
Until I was 16 and a half. And at that time, I graduated from high school. We only had 11 years in those days. And you have to go back and know about my relationship with MB and Edna, because that's very important.
Well,
Anyway, at age 16 and a half, MB sent me to New York to go to work after I graduated. And I spent about 6 or 7 months in New York.
after high school?
After high school, because at that time, it was 1945, the war had ended, and the University of Texas was on a different kind of a semester. They had 3.
You know, Dad, I think you're skipping ahead just a little bit. I want to hear this, but can we go back? I'd like to hear a little bit more about your childhood.
Happy. Sure.
Yes, let's go back to what it was like growing up in Wichita Falls. What was the community like in Wichita Falls?
Well, I don't think it was too favorable for Jews, frankly. And you have to go back in my relationship. I lived with my bubby off and on with MB and Edna. Marcia and Edna lost a child about my age when he was 3 years old, Herschel.
That was their oldest child.
Their first son, oldest child. And for all practical purposes, MB and Edna adopted me as their own son.
And Edna and your mother, Mamie, were sisters.
Sisters, correct.
And so they adopted you as their own child for practical purposes from the very beginning, or When would you say?
Oh, Sheryl, I just don't remember, you know.
But you
But-
said you lived with your bubby, with your
Yes, and
grandmother
then
until you were 12. So were
No,
you
but I
spend-
spent time with MB and Edna,
Okay.
and they had me go to the same school as Marvin went, even
Is
though
there-
I should have gone to another school. And
Was
they
this
used
for elementary school or
elementary
for?
school, yes, and they used their address for my address and so forth. And I must tell you also about my Aunt Goldie Persky, because she was instrumental in raising me too. I must tell you that.
And Goldie Persky was another sister.
Right,
Yes. She was the oldest of the children.
right.
Mhm.
Anyway, what else can I tell you about high school? I always kidded. I was asked to speak once in Wichita Falls, and I told them at the time, and I have the annual, which I'd like to show you too, of my senior year. And I kidded everybody. I was one of the top 5 male graduates of the school. And they devoted maybe a 3 to 5 picture of us and about 15 pages of the football team. And I told them if they ever reversed that, then I knew that they were going to survive.
How many were in your graduating class of high school? Do you recall?
Maybe 400 or so, Sheryl.
Okay. And what was the, what were you involved in when you were a child? What kind of activities did you enjoy?
Well, Sheryl, I was not a good athlete, I'll tell you that. And in high school, I enjoyed being on the newspaper. I was one of the editors of the newspaper, which was very good. And I enjoyed mathematics and all the other things. And sometimes we'd get involved in softball, but we didn't have too many activities, as I recall.
Did you work when you were in school?
That's a good question, because I started working maybe at the age of 10 or 11, and that was at store number 1, Wichita Falls. And every Sunday, MB would take us in his convertible and go down Scott Avenue, I believe it's the name of the street, and make sure that our store was still on the corner. And then he'd take us to get ice cream. But that was Marvin, and it wouldn't be Donnie yet, just Marvin and I, because Donnie was too young.
Okay, Marvin was MB's son, who was a year younger than you were.
Correct.
Okay.
And we go down every Saturday and work in the store. And we did menial things like taking jewelry over to the shop, you know, wrapping packages, things of that type. And we did that until I was about 1943. We used to be apprenticed out to someone else, and I was apprenticed to Ben Lipshe and Eudice, who lived in Amarillo. I remember because it was the war years, and we had a victory garden.
So you were apprenticed out, does that mean in the summer that you
In the
would,
summer, yes, and I
you,
would live,
you would be sent out?
right, and that was 43, 44, trying to think what I did in 44.
So in 1943, you were how old, approximately?
Let's see, 28 and 43, so I was 28, 38, about 13, 14 years old.
So you were sent to spend the summer with your uncle?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the following year, if I'm not mistaken, it was 1944, I spent the summer with Al and Sadie Gartner. And Al was a great teacher, and I lived with him in San Antonio. In 1945, I was sent back to New York, and I really had wanted to go to the University of Pennsylvania, but the war had ended, and I kid everybody, they asked me about the Peloponnesian War, and I said, we didn't fight the Peloponnesian War in Wichita Falls. But I did get accepted to University of California at Berkeley, but I had no idea where it was at that time. I had no money at all, you know, so I went to the University of Texas for 2 years.
So you went to the University of Texas, but when you stopped living with your bubby at age 12, did you then move in with...
My mother had moved from Amarillo to Wichita Falls and had remarried.
Who did she marry?
Sam Gray.
Mm-hmm.
And they had one of those little houses with asbestos siding on it that they built right after and during the war, you know. A very modest house, and I'd walk to school.
Mm-hmm.
And
So did you live then with them until you graduated high school?
yes,
Yes.
so I lived for maybe 3 or 4 years at the most.
And
Then I went to New York.
but you and they had a son together who is...
Yes, Jerry Gray,
Mm-hmm.
and he's 10 years younger than I am.
Mm-hmm. So you lived with them, and then you graduated high school. You moved to New York and worked in New York for how long before you went to college?
Well, Sheryl, college classes didn't begin until October or November, so I spent, June, July, August, September, October, 4 or 5 months in New York.
Was there a jewelry company in New York at that time, or were you
No,
working
this was our
elsewhere?
office. MB had opened an office, and it was a wonderful education for me. And I was a courier. I would take the jewelry to the manufacturers and so forth. And so I got to know York quite well. And when I first moved there, first week or two, I lived at the YMCA, and then I moved to the YMHA on 92nd and Lexington.
Is it still there?
Still there. And fortunately, I had Marcy's brother there, Brunky we called him, Abe Zale. And whenever I needed a good meal on the weekend, he'd take care of me. But one of the best things that happened to me, Sheryl, is that I was walking down, I want to say it was Park Avenue with MB, and I had taken him to a bookstore, and he suggested that I give him a suggestion about a book. And so I said, I read in the New York Times, there was a book called Dirty Eddie by a fellow named Ledrick Billman, as I recall, a long time ago. And when you bought the book, they gave you a little aluminum horseshoe with a penny inside, and MB gave it to me. And I had that with me, and one day I had 4 cents in my pocket. I couldn't get to the office. I think a bus was a dime and a subway was a nickel. So I knocked that penny out. And I've always tried to teach that to my children, that to be so poor as that was just a great service to me and my family as we grew older. And then the University of Texas opened in October, and I went to Texas for 2 years. But after the first year, interesting story, I was sent to Omaha to work for Les Kornfeld. And that was a good education too.
So was that Les Kornfeld, was that one of the Zale stores?
One of the managers.
Okay.
And when I got back to the University of Texas, I joined a fraternity, and I had
Which fraternity had you joined?
Pi, and I had a mustache. And they wrestled me to the ground and cut off my mustache. That shows you how square they were in 1946. It wouldn't happen today.
So no, it certainly wouldn't happen today. So they felt that you were a little radical when you came back from Omaha with a mustache. What did you study?
At Texas? You take general courses the first 2 years there. And then I left because I was really more interested in starting Zale Corporation than I was to going to college. So MB
So just 1 second. So you were interested in starting Zale Corporation. Up till this point, how many stores would you say there were? It was just
There were 13 stores.
13 stores. And where were the stores located? In what cities?
Well, most of them were Texas and Oklahoma.
But
Wichita Falls, Tulsa, Oklahoma City, Amarillo, Austin, Springfield, Dallas.
And how did MB know to open a New York office when he had mainly Texas stores?
Well, he was always far looking. He could look in the future. And Marvin and I used to talk about a philosophy for Zale. And we'd say we want to give the customer the best quality jewelry at the lowest possible price. And that's what we did. We had terrific quality jewelry, sold it on credit, which MB originated. And from that base, Marvin and I, well, first after I was in New York for about 2 years, and I wasn't interested in going back to school, although I did enroll at the Columbia University School of General Studies on 2 occasions.
Did you attend?
Sometimes. But I was more interested in the business, So he sent us to Europe. So this was about 1947 and 48. And we lived in Europe for about 15 months. We lived in Antwerp.
This was you and Marvin.
Marvin and I, right. But to do that, you had to be enrolled in a school. You couldn't stay beyond 3 months. So we enrolled in the École de Commerce Solvay, which is part of the University of Brussels. The interesting thing was that our professor was from Russia, speaking French, and we couldn't even understand a word he said. So I studied I took Berlin's courses in French, which was interesting.
So you learned French?
Somewhat.
Yes.
And then after spending a year or so there, and we did everything. We learned to cut diamonds, to sort diamonds for many jewelers around the world. MB sent us to Paris.
You learned to cut diamonds?
Sure. And we went to Paris for about 6 weeks, learned about fancy cut diamonds. From there, he sent us to Switzerland.
And did MB know these things himself, or he counted on you to know these things?
We didn't really know those things.
Go ahead, you're doing fine. Would you like to take a little break?
No, that's fine. So then Marvin and I were sent to a little town called Soleure in Switzerland, Solothurn, and it was near Bienne. And we worked in a factory that made watches completely, except for the hairsprings. They made every part of a watch, maybe the hairsprings and the jewels. And so we really knew it, and then we would take time to go through the Amiga plant, the Rolex plant, and then Marvin and I decided we would buy bicycles. So we did things I would never let my children do today. We bicycled from Lugano in Switzerland to Milano.
Oh, it's the first I've heard of this.
Yeah, very interesting, you know.
You haven't shared this with us before, so you did
We
a
bicycled.
real adventures.
Right. Of course, when my granddaughter does this today, I say, how can you do that at such a young age?
Well, you know the old expression, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
But it's very interesting because we went from Milano to Firenze to Florence. We went to Venice, and we went to, what other cities? We went to Milano,
So
which
you
was
so
great.
you really traveled.
We traveled a lot, and then we bicycled back to the border of Switzerland and France.
How did you travel from the United States overseas?
Well, it was the Queen Mary.
So it,
And so we invited everybody to come. Good question. We invited everybody to come to our suite, which was 5 floors below the deck, and 4 bunks to a room, and barely 2 people could get in there. And so that was our going off party.
So this was the days before air travel overseas?
Oh, sure.
Mhm. I think that's interesting to note. Let's go back. I feel like there's still more that I want to cover before we get too far into your adult years,
Sure.
Dad. Growing up in Wichita Falls, did your family belong to a synagogue?
That's a very good question, Sheryl. And we had a Orthodox congregation. We didn't have a rabbi. We had a shehed, someone who kills
A kosher butcher?
kosher butcher
Uh-huh.
with a long beard. And I'd have to say yortzeit for my father. I'd have to get up on the bima, and he'd bend over me and say, Leo, repeat after me, yiskadalve, yiskadashimei. Couldn't stand it. Garlic. Couldn't stand it. And so I just wanted to get away from that as far as I could. And then we had a Reform congregation. We didn't have a rabbi. We had someone who had dropped out of the school, Hebrew University. What was it called?
Hebrew Union College.
Hebrew Union College,
The
right.
Reform movements.
Right, Paul Goldstucker. We had a rabbi for maybe 6 months or so. And MB did not believe in us having a good Jewish education.
He did not.
Or keeping kosher.
And
'Cause,
why would you say that he felt that way?
well, he used to explain to me in technical terms that you kept kosher because in olden days you used to eat everything off of a wooden plate. And he says today you have ceramic plates, so it's no longer necessary. So he was a pretty good agnostic.
Mm-hmm. So how many Jewish families would you say there were, and do you have any recollection in Wichita Falls?
I have no idea, Sheryl, but it's interesting. I grew up, Tex Fagedal was there, Rita Obendorfer was there. Jacobus?
Gloria
Gloria
Jacob.
Jacobus, yes, but she was ill. And we probably had in our graduating class 18 kids totally in the temple.
Okay.
And the rabbi from Dallas, Lefkowitz, would come in and confirm us, by the way. It was very nice of him.
That's very interesting to hear. Did your family celebrate the Jewish holidays?
That's another good question that you asked me, because we go into Fort Worth where Marcia's father was there, Sam Sale, and he was just a house painter. And he would give the services, and he'd start at 6 o'clock in the evening, and he'd get through, about 10 or 11 at night. He'd daven all the time, and we kids would just race holy hell,
So would he be doing this at home, or was he doing this at a
he was at home.
synagogue?
He had a very modest A very modest house.
So he'd be leading the service at home.
Mhm.
Uh-huh.
And that's an
And-
interesting question because his wife would greet us at the door with the yolk of eggs that they would boil, total cholesterol. You didn't know about that in those days, and she would give us all that greasy food and all the cholesterol.
Well, I imagine that there was a reason for that, that those were the kinds of foods that sustained people back in that time. Did your mother or Morris and Edna belong to Jewish organizations in Wichita Falls in those times?
Sure, we didn't have those things. We had the temple and the synagogue,
So you did go to religious school because you were confirmed with Rabbi Lefkowitz?
Well, yes,
Yes.
but it wasn't organized like today. Maybe we went on Sunday morning, and that's all the Jewish education that we had.
But even though you're saying that MB could have been agnostic, it was still stressed to you the value of being Jewish.
No question about it. He just didn't believe in some of the things that went along with it. We had a mikveh there, for example, and but he was a pretty far-reaching thinker when it came to that.
I thank you for sharing this with me. So we're going to go back to you and Marvin were in Europe. You were traveling, experiencing life, learning the nuts and bolts of the jewelry business. And how long did you stay in Europe?
We were there about 15 months, Sheryl.
And then you came back, and do you remember the year?
Came back in 1950, and shortly thereafter I was drafted, and they permitted me to stay working in the store through Christmas. And then in January 1951, I was drafted into the Army.
And how long did you spend doing basic training?
I think we must have spent 6 weeks or 2 months at Fort Sill. And
Fort Sill, that's in Oklahoma?
I'm sorry, let me go back. We were trained at Fort Smith, Camp Chaffee.
Fort Smith, is that Arkansas? Where is that?
Arkansas.
Arkansas.
And they asked me which branch of the service I wanted to be in, and I said I want to volunteer for the infantry, Sugar.
Yeah.
And so I did quite well on my exams for the Army. They wanted to send me to officers training school if I would enlist for 3 years. I said, no way, I'm going back to Wichita Falls into the business. So they sent me to Fort Sill, where I became an artillery surveyor. You surveyed in a gun position, and you had to learn to use a Gurley transit to know where you are, and you called in the firepower. So you basically became a forward observer whose lifespan is about 2 weeks maybe. And when I got to Korea, they wanted me to stay in Japan first, do administrative work. I said, no, I want to get into combat. Sugar. Remember, I wasn't married.
How did you come up with these things?
And so...
So were you sent to Japan
No.
first?
Yeah, the troop ship landed in Japan.
So you had another ocean crossing on a ship again.
Yeah, about 12 or 14 days on those ships.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I got to Japan, they said, okay, we're sending you into Korea. So when I got to Korea, and I forgot the name, it could have been Yongdong-po or someplace like that. It was where all the draftees and all the people enlisting in the Army came. And they said, can you type? I said, yes. And they said, we're sending you to the medical detachment. We're putting you in charge of the medical detachment of the 1st Cavalry Division.
Putting you in charge of it?
Yes, because the master sergeant who was there was a regular Army officer, and he, I shouldn't say non-commissioned officer, it's a master sergeant. He wanted to get back home. He was tired of all the fighting. So he left me in charge, and I didn't know a damn thing. And the thing
what did your duties entail?
I didn't know. He just said, here, take it over. And he left the next day. And interesting, and it's really affected my life. When I got there, first afternoon I was strafed. And I jumped in a foxhole. And I said, well, I'm not going to do this any longer. I'm going to sleep in the back of an ambulance if I get strafed. So after I was there about 3 days, We had only doctors and dentists with us, so a dentist came up to me. I want to say his name was Arnie Ginsberg. It slips my mind. He
That's
said,
okay.
Leo, a British Army officer has been shot down in North Korea. Let's fly over and pick him up. Now, you must remember we were United Nations forces, so we had a Marine pilot and 2 Navy medics, and we were Army medics.
So you all worked together during that time?
Yeah, and if somebody was wounded, we'd strap them onto the helicopter and send them back, just like in MASH.
Okay.
And I put my foot on the strut to get in the helicopter. I put a couple of grenades in my pocket, and maybe I took a carbine with me. And I strapped on an aid kit. I wouldn't have the slightest idea how to do anything but give him morphine. And they said, get off. The Navy medics had showed up. And 15 minutes later, I saw the helicopter get shot down. And I said, pardon me. I said, maybe God has something else for me.
So that was really a very defining moment
So,
in your life.
And it taught me a lot.
Was there a Jewish component to serving for your military service? Did you participate in any kind of?
That's a very good question, Sheryl. And I think I have a picture with me. I think I showed you the picture. We had a rabbi that came to us one time. I don't think I was in that picture, but I got to go back to Seoul twice for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which probably saved my life because the Army started a big battle on Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. And we went to the German embassy in Seoul. It was 1 story high. There were no high-rise buildings, and we had services. And I got to drive the officer back to the base, and we were 30 or 40 miles from our troops. Very good question.
How long did you serve in the service?
2 years, and I came back on January 1st, 2003.
No, it wasn't 2003.
2000, I'm
No,
sorry,
2053.
2053, I'm sorry.
1953.
yeah.
1953.
Sure.
You came back. And what was it like coming back to the United States after having been away like that? Had you seen a lot of changes?
Well, Sheryl, I remember one thing. I remember getting off the ship January 1st. The Red Cross was the only person to meet us.
Where did you land?
We landed in San Francisco.
Mhm.
And then I went home right away, and I went to New York because Marvin was getting married. So I was home about a week, and then I traveled to New York for Marvin's wedding.
But home at this point, MB and Edna had moved to Dallas
Mhm.
after you graduated high school.
Mhm.
So they were living in Dallas. The business was based in Dallas as well as New
Mhm.
York. And while you were gone, the business grew from
Mhm.
the 13 or so stores to what did you come home to find?
There were about 40 some odd stores. It's an interesting, you're a good interviewer, Sheryl. When I got back, the first thing I did is a month or so after I was there, I met the love of my life.
Oh, the month after you came back.
Maybe 2 months, wasn't it, Bobby? And it was love at first sight. And so Bobby asked me to marry her, which I agreed in San Antonio. We'd been there to meet Morris and Edna and the Gimps.
Well, you're getting ahead of yourself. Why don't we take a little break and then I want to hear that story. We were talking about when you met the love of your life, who happens to be my mother.
Okay.
Start at the beginning. You came back from the service. You were, I'm sure at that point, being introduced to lots of young women. And how did you happen to meet Bobby?
Well, it's an interesting question. You're a great interviewer. I decided I was going to make a list and go A, B, C. And I remember A, it didn't work out, and B was Bobby, so I couldn't go any further than that. And so we got married, and I had been working at Corrigan's in Houston for a few months. And in B, Mo Gimp, actually, we were buying a store in Salt Lake City. And Bobby was pregnant, by the way, after the first week we got married. And MB said, we're sending you to Salt Lake City to take over a store. So Marvin and I went out there.
Were you surprised that you would be transferred so soon from Houston? Did you feel that you would have spent time in Houston, or did you realize that this was part of?
Well, I had worked there before. I had.
You had worked in Salt Lake City before?
I'm trying to remember. I'd worked in Houston. I'm trying to remember when I went there. I'd worked at Corrigan's. Anyway.
And Corrigan's was
our fine store.
One of your fine jewelry stores, part of a better division.
So Marvin and I moved out there and we bought those stores. That was store number 44, by the way. And I must tell you one thing. MB and I had the most fantastic relationship because when I got back, he sent me to California.
When you got back from
Korea.
Uh-huh.
He sent me to California to buy a store called Granite Brothers. And I remember we met in Trader Vic's in Oakland, California. And the store was a lovely store. The problem is they had a strike. And the store had a book value of $1.5 million and offered him $1.1 million. And he got very indignant. And he got on the phone, he called MB. He said, you know what this little whippersnapper did? He offered me $1.1 million for a store worth $1.5 million. I didn't ask him. And he
You
said,
didn't ask who?
MB for permission.
You just.
He said, if he made that offer, it's a valid offer. And Joe Granite, who owned the store, his teeth dropped. Because here I was, 20-some odd years old, making him an offer for over $1 million.
And that was a tremendous amount of money.
Yeah, in those days.
In those days.
He turned it down, but he had a strike. And I went back there maybe 5 years later. And the net worth had gone down to $300,000. And I said, MB, we've never done this before. And I haven't asked. We're going to give you Zale shares. And that was the first time we gave Zale shares. And those shares appreciated, so we had...
So you gave Zale shares to buy the store
instead of cash.
And at this point, Mr.
They
Granite...
appreciated in price, and he was able to give each one of his children, 3 of them, $600,000 each. That's what his goal was. And that was very interesting, that relationship that I had with MB. Because he had
trusted you.
Great confidence in me.
He saw your potential as though as a young boy.
Yeah, but I was hard to handle. I mean, it wasn't easy.
Well, he saw your intelligence.
And then our first child, you were born there. And I recall that because the ink wasn't dry on the ticket. I had to get on the plane and go to New York, I think that afternoon, for a meeting. Is that right, Bobby?
24 hours after Sheryl
Yeah.
was born.
And because I was dedicated to what I was doing. And then I got another call to move to Seattle.
So how long did you live in Salt Lake City?
1 year.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell everybody I got my PhD in Seattle because number one, mother miscarried, number one. Number two, the Teamster tried to organize me, which they couldn't do. Number three, I was being sued over fair trade laws, which I wouldn't obey because they didn't enforce them. And I tell everybody I got my PhD learning all those things. In the meantime, the population, the working population in Seattle dropped from 150,000 maybe to 30,000, one of those deals with Boeing, where either you had a job or you didn't. So it was good training for me. And then after that, he brought me into the Dallas office.
No, you went to New Orleans.
I'm sorry, I went to New Orleans,
You went
yes.
to New Orleans because you were forgetting.
Yeah, I forgot that, right.
New Orleans was an important, so you lived in Seattle for about how long?
About a year.
About a year, and it was just one store there?
One store.
And then
Got sent to New Orleans.
you got sent to New Orleans.
Got a telephone call again from Bogan.
And what was Mo Gimp's job in the company?
Well, he was more like a senior advisor than anything. Brilliant man.
Was he a relative of?
No.
No, just a close friend,
Close friend.
Of MB's, and of course the families. So you were sent to New Orleans, and
I took over a store that was established about 1814, as I recall, Hausman's. And Gabe Hausman and I became dear friends. And that was a very interesting experience too, to take over a store and have him work for me as the manager and so forth. I spent a year there, and then I got called into the Dallas office.
something important happened in New Orleans for your family. And do you remember?
Well, I'm talking about my cousin.
No, you had a daughter.
Oh,
Another
okay.
daughter.
Okay. Amy was born there, barely. Got her to the hospital in time. And then, shall I skip ahead a little bit? You want to hear more about New Orleans?
No,
We had a
we're
wonderful
not
time there,
rushing.
but I had a cousin, Barbara Faye Cohen from Fort Worth, who lived there and married into a lovely family, and we became very, very dear friends. And her husband, Walter Jr., and I became the dearest of friends. In fact, I was invited to be one of the pallbearers at his funeral, and he became a justice of the Supreme Court of the state. And Barbara Faye and I and Bobby always stay in touch.
What was it like when you were traveling like this, going from city to city? Did you all put down roots in the Jewish communities where you lived?
We tried, but we were only there for a year.
Mm-hmm. So, and you were in New Orleans for about a year, and then you received another phone call.
Mm-hmm. To come to Dallas.
Now, when you would leave these cities, were other managers were brought in to take over what you had started?
I had trained them when I was there.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you would train
Mhm.
people and get the stores up and running the
Mhm.
way that you would want, and then did you know that Dallas would be your ultimate goal?
Well, I had really wanted to go to New York to work and run the New York office, but MB wouldn't let me go there because he wanted me with him, I assume.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to get into merchandising, which I knew very well.
So was it the first time that you had actually lived in Dallas when you moved to Dallas?
No, I lived here one summer,
Mm-hmm.
and I lived in Morrison Edna's home on Southwestern. And there's a story there, but I don't want to get into it.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, now we're certainly curious. So you moved to Dallas then in about 1950.
4 maybe.
Okay. No, it wasn't. I was born in 1954, so it had to have been about 1957 or
No,
50.
56 then.
Amy was.
6 weeks old and she was born in 57.
So you moved to
57, was that
1950.
long? I thought it was before that.
So
Okay.
in 1957, you moved to Dallas.
Okay.
And you went to work in then the not in a store at this point,
The
but
home office, right?
but in the home office. Since we're talking about your career, continue on about with your career with sales.
Well, I did what I liked very much. I did the merchandising, the diamond merchandising, which I thought was very important. And then got the idea one day to start the Fine Jewelers Guild. We had the basis in Corrigan's and in Hausman and some of the other stores I had bought, Zell Brothers, for example, in Portland, Oregon. So I created a division called the Fine Jewelers Guild. Mm-hmm. And I had two things happen to me. Willis Calishaw, who was one of my managers, he had been a watchmaker in a store, and I had him as my assistant. And then a wonderful woman, Nelda Shannon, who I picked up. In fact, I talked to her the other day. She's 91 years old. Fabulous, fabulous, tall Catholic girl, could drink anybody under the table. And it's another story there, and I'll tell you about that. And the three of us started this division, which grew when I left the company. At that time, it was a $400 million division. And Nelda worked for me, and she was terrific.
So you started a division, then were you going around the country buying other fine jewelry stores, or how did that
Well,
work?
it was more than fine, just bought any store. I did most of the negotiating for stores. And just trying to think. Then I went into management, and I became what's called a group vice president over all the jewelry stores. And it was a very challenging task.
How many stores were there at the time?
I'm sure there could have been 800, 900 stores. I just don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did acquisitions for them. And then went up the line, and I eventually retired when the company was sold, which we'd get into. I became a board member and eventually vice chairman of the board.
And when was the company sold?
83.
About 1983 or so.
In the early 1980s.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a separate story right there.
So I've heard. So when this company was sold, do you recall how many stores there were?
Well, at that time, Sheryl, I think we had about 2,000 stores because we had bought a shoe company And we owned Skiller drugstores at one time,
And it
Bean
wasn't,
department stores.
and it wasn't just in the United States.
You know, we were all over the world.
What was it like when you spent time with MB? Do you recall some of the conversations that you must have had about starting with a very small jewelry business, with a jewelry counter to a jewelry store to what you all created?
Well, I get back to the story that he told Ben Lipsky in Wichita Falls. He wouldn't let anybody wait on a diamond customer, and finally he let Ben Lipsky wait on a diamond customer, and Ben said, "What shall I tell him?" And I always remember this. MB said, "Tell him the truth," and that's what we tried to do. Tell our customers the truth, give them the best product, give them credit, and it was a concept that was just tremendous.
What were some of the other things that you recall as having learned from MB and Edna?
Well, he asked me to travel with him around the world. We'd go around the world once or twice a year for several years. And I'd go into the stores and try to teach him what I thought was my concept of merchandising. And we had wonderful factories working for us in Hong Kong. And we made beautiful things, just tremendous things, and a lot of originality in them. And I remember going into the stores that we bought in Germany called Christ, C-H-R-I-S-T, Christ, we called them. And they said, "Oh, you never sell these things here." I said, "Well, just try, run an ad, you know." And sure enough, you know, the people are the same all over. They like beautifully styled goods, reasonably priced, and that became a very nice subsidiary of ours. But MB and I would go around the world, and we'd go to Israel, where we had a plant where we cut stones, and we had an office where we bought them. From there, we'd fly to India. Yeah, we'd go to India. We'd go to Sri Lanka. India, we had wonderful cutters in India. And my wife won't let me tell you all the stories about what happened.
Well, you can tell the story about the hospital.
Why don't you tell us about
That's very interesting, yes. The people we dealt with all wanted to give back to their community. And so we had a family there, the Ansali family. They were Jains, very religious people. And the product that they cut was just absolutely wonderful. Couldn't cut it any better. And they had very difficult stones to work with. And so MB made a deal with them that we would tithe each month. Each of us gave $1,000 toward building a hospital. And Donnie would go over there. We built the hospital.
Now, who was Donnie?
Don Zale, I'm sorry. Another cousin and brother. And he came in. He was president of the company. And Zale family and the Bensali family built the hospital in Dessa, which was right on the border of Pakistan and India. And Donnie put it under the auspices of the medical school here. And everybody was very proud that they could do that in the little communities that they came from. It was a great concept and a chance to do good in the world. But the thing I want to tell you is the way I would work is I would go in and I would pick out the goods that I wanted to sell in the stores. And I'd take the rejects and put them on the side, the rejections. And MB said, "I'll buy that."
Who would say that?
MB. He'd take all the things I didn't want to buy, because I tried to buy the nicer goods, and he'd create a market out of it. And that was the challenging thing. What did we do with all these things? And so having 3 or 4 different kinds of stores was a perfect outlet for the things that we did. And we did that in Sri Lanka. We'd go to Sri Lanka. We'd go to India, go to Israel. We'd go to Thailand, and we'd end up in Hong Kong.
Paris and England.
I'm sorry?
Paris.
You've
Paris,
been all
yes,
over the world.
Yeah.
So you traveled for many years. You were building the business. What was it like raising your family?
Well, you're the best example, and my wife. And I said at that time, Bobby taught me the best thing that a husband can do for his children is love their mother. And that I've done with all my heart. And
So
that's
you
why
all have been married for how many years now?
Happily? It's going on, what, Bobby, 56 years?
Almost.
Right.
Almost. And as we're doing this interview today, you just celebrated your 80th birthday in the fall.
Surprise party.
Yes. So you had a happy life raising your children. And what was the Jewish community like as you raised your family?
Well, I tell you, Sheryl, we went to Temple Emmanuel, and I thought that was very interesting because my first association with it was when I came back from the service. And Temple Emmanuel was in South Dallas, as I recall. And Levi Olin was the rabbi. And I found him very challenging, mentally challenging, you know. And I loved him because I came back, and you come back from a war zone, you're not in the best of shape. And he was able to give me a lot of solace about that.
Did you have a personal relationship with him, or just from having been sitting in services?
That's a wonderful question, Sheryl, because I didn't find out all these things. He came to me one day, and I would dole out the money for the then Zell Foundation, and he wanted $5,000 to write a book, and I gave him the $5,000. And there's a frontispiece in there to which he attributed to me. It wasn't my money; it was Zell family money.
So there was a charitable giving from the family.
I'll tell you about how. That's
and
a good
we'll
question
talk about
too.
that in a little bit.
And then he called me and he said, "I want to start a lectureship program. I want to bring in the best of doctors." He said, "Hospital is only as good as the doctors who are there." And me being a smart aleck, I said, "Those doctors are rich. They can afford to pay for a lecture if they want them." He said, "Leo, you don't understand. If you really want to do something, you have to bring in the best of doctors." And so I relented, and Bobby and I started this lectureship for the doctors, basically at Children's Medical Center. And we met wonderful people. In fact, I've just shown you the book from Dr. Holt, who wrote the book on pediatrics. And I have a wonderful letter from Edna on that. And we went on to meet wonderful people. I can't remember all the names, but
That's not what's important. So you started a
we
lectureship.
had
through
Dr.
children's-
Gadicek, for example, who got the Nobel Prize for his work in slow-acting viruses from cannibals. We had, let me think of who else. We had a doctor from Stanford who did the work on DNA. We had the one doctor who did the work on, let me think of his name, Dr. was it Sabin? Who did the work on
vaccines.
Vaccine.
Yeah. And these are fabulous individuals.
So Levi Olin came to you and wanted to establish a lectureship
Mhm.
through Children's Medical Center to bring
Right.
in the brightest and finest doctors, and you helped with that. And you were telling me about your relationship with Levi Olin and belonging to Temple Emmanuel. Were you active at the temple?
Somewhat, Sheryl. I just didn't have time, but I was on the board where they selected the next president, and I got, it was Rosemary in there, as I recall.
Rosemary Bird.
So that,
Yeah.
I bet, that was probably in the 1980s.
I don't remember, Sheryl, but I did several things there that were interesting. But I want to get back to the Children's Hospital.
I'd like to hear.
We lost our first son there, William. He died of aspiration. I think he had what in his stomach, Bobby had I can't remember, it was had obstruction in his stomach. And in those days, you had to transfer the child in one of these little ambulances, is that what you call it? From one hospital to another. And he lived for 21 days. And so I went to MB and I said, MB, they're trying to start a new hospital here, and they need a major gift. And I have a picture to show you that you can photograph. I said, MB, I'd like to give him $5,000 for a room. He said, Leo, I'll make you a challenge. He said, I just sold my house at 4400 Weems Place, that famous home. He said, I'll give you the proceeds of that house if you, Mark, and Donnie will match it, which we did. And so the lead grant was that from the Zell Foundation. And I remember, I'll show you the picture of it later. I think it's very important. Of course, it's grown to an enormous facility today. And if you go in there on the first floor, we built the surgical wing of the hospital.
Of Children's Medical
Children's
Center.
Medical. And when Andrew was born, he had a hernia. You remember that?
Of your grandson,
My grandson's,
Andrew.
right.
But stop for just a minute. I realize that we're leaving out a very important family member. You moved to Dallas, you lost a son, but then what happened after that?
Well, my son David was born. And
About 6 years after I was born.
And we were very concerned about him, and we had this wonderful doctor say he's going to be fine.
Mhm.
But Bobby and I was touch and go, having gone through that.
And then you were just getting ready to say that Andrew, David's son, was born.
Yes, and he had a hernia. So we took him up there to be operated on, and this doctor came out. I can't remember his name. It started with a V.
That's
He
okay.
s- Huh?
It's
He
okay
said,
not to
Leo,
remember
you
his
don't
name."
remember me, but I was the surgeon who ran this surgical wing when you gave us the money for it. And if you go there now,
And that was so many years ago.
I know, but isn't that wonderful? He remembered me, and then he remembered what we did. And you go down there, you'll see a big bronze plaque, and we dedicated it to Morton Lewis, as I recall. But
Look, why don't we pause for just a minute? I think we're about out of time on this. No? 10 more minutes. Okay, then let's keep going. Uh-huh. So I'm sorry, I wanted to check on the time. So you were saying,
But we did those kind of things, and one thing that I think is important too, you asked me about a statue that Baylor gave me. Very interesting story. Boone Powell came to us one day, and I was in the room, Boone Powell Sr., with Ben Lipsky and M.B. Zale. And he said, I have a gift for you. And what's that old saying, beware of a Greek bearing gifts or something? I said, okay, Boone, what do you want? He says, I want you to build the emergency room facility at Baylor. And the family agreed to do that. That was about 1966, as I recall. And so it was a very small emergency room. And one day I was with Margaret Johnson, that was Eric Johnson's daughter, who got a call. We were at the Petroleum Club. Her dad had a heart attack. And she said, would you drive me to the hospital? I'm too nervous. I said, I'd be happy to. I said, but don't worry about it. He's going to be in the Johnson wing of the hospital in the Zale emergency room facility. And of course, he pulled through. But I've always had that long relationship with him.
but MB recognized early on the value of philanthropy, of
Mhm.
giving back to the community.
Mhm.
So you were really raised with it by MB, and you learned these things from an early age. How do you think that all came about?
Sure, you have the best questions, because what happened is, I think we met at Ron Mankoff's house, and they wanted to start these charitable programs at the Federation. And I said to Ron, I said, I'll give you $5,000 and we'll start the Fields Family Fund. So MB, I told him about that. He said, can I join you? And we'll call it the Zale Fields Fund. This is about 1982 or something like that. And I have a letter to show you on that.
Oh, I see.
And he said, I'll give you $1 million in Zale stock. And I said, well, you want to call it Zale Fields? I'll take that challenge anytime. So that was really the beginning of the Zale Foundation. Although there was a company foundation, we had this Zale Fields thing. And then when the company was sold, we split it up. And it's interesting, I read the letters the other day, how prescient I was about the foundation, because the advice I gave him in those days is just as good today, Sheryl.
And what was some of the advice? What were some of the things that you recall?
Well, I wanted to get everybody involved, number one. We had Curtis Meadows talk to us about getting involved in the community. Don't just give to Jewish causes. We have tremendous problems in town, which we did. We would tie in with the Republic Bank and Jimmy Aston, and they would match whatever we would do for the black community. It was a wonderful opportunity for us, and we had some original programs. Avance was one, if you recall, that we really originated that program.
Tell us what Avance is.
I think they took basically Chicano kids in the high school who had children, and they didn't know how to raise the children. So Mike Romaine came up with this idea.
And who was Mike Romaine?
He was the head of the Zale Foundation in those years.
Yes.
In fact, it was honored by being the lead editorial in the New York Times on New Year's Day many, many years ago.
And continues to be honored to this day.
Yeah, in San Antonio, I think the foundation, the family built or contributed to the new facility.
Yes.
And
yes.
you would know a lot about that. And the proudest thing to me is when they made you the chairperson of the Zale Foundation.
Well, you're jumping the gun a little bit.
Okay.
That's very. So you had a foundation through the business.
Mm-hmm.
So you were involved in charitable giving
Mm-hmm.
through the business. And MB and Edna set an example
Mm-hmm.
that you and their children Marvin, Donnie, and we haven't talked about their daughter,
Gloria.
Gloria, who you feel such a kinship with all three of MB and Edna's children.
Well, I think I showed you, Sheryl, Edna considered me their child. And
Tell me about that.
I think when I made a speech once, and I sent her a copy of the speech, maybe it was Dr. Holt's lecture, come to think of it, and she said that she lost a child, and in God's way, He gave me to her.
It's really very beautiful. You were very blessed. Our family's been very blessed. And you've added so much to MB and Edna's life. We're very lucky.
He tolerated me.
We're a very lucky family. Let's take a break here.
Okay.
Okay, we've taken a little break, and I'd like to swing back for a few minutes because I'd like to talk more about the family. I have the luxury of getting to do the interview today, but I know you're proud of all three of us, for all three of your children, for their individual accomplishments. Your daughter, Amy.
Well, Amy is a junior mother here. She takes care of us. On a whim, she'll come. If she heard that Bobby coughed, she'll get on the plane the next morning and be here to take care of her. Amy's done a fabulous job of her family.
And how many children does Amy have? And tell us her husband and the names of Amy's children.
Okay. Well, Amy is married to Dr. Wade Rosenberg.
And where do they live?
They live in Houston. And he was trained by Dr. Noon and Dr. DeBakey, and he is a vascular surgeon with a specialty in operating on pancreas and kidneys and doing transplants.
Yes.
And he has just been elected president of the doctors and is on the board of the big Methodist hospital. That's the respect that he's held in. And he's a fabulous, fabulous surgeon. And Amy, God bless her, is very talented. She's an artist. She designs jewelry. And she is a junior mother to us right in August, the senior mother. And a whim, she'll come down here and takes care of Bobby and me. Mm-hmm. And I just adore that child. And of course, she's got three spunky children too.
And tell us their names.
Well, the oldest one is Matthew.
And how old is he?
Matthew is what, 26 or 7?
He's
and
27.
He's got the idea that he can become another Bill Gates or something like that. And he's developing a website called eDoctor. And he hasn't gone to get his master's degree, but he's getting a master's education, an MBA, in developing this website. I could never have taught him as much as he's learned when he's spending his own money to do that. And then I have Ethan, and Ethan is a quiet, but the water runs deep. And he's now working for David Zale in New York, learning how to be a money manager. And
for our cousin David Zale.
Yes, and who's taken him on, and it's just terrific for him because he'll have to go to get his master's degree and get an MBA. But David's a wonderful teacher for him.
David is Marvin's son.
And David is Marvin's son.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, I've got my daughter Sheryl, who I'm
No, we're talking about Betsy.
Oh, Betsy. Miss Betsy. Oh, Betsy's. She's got a lot of spunk. Now, she just got back, I guess it was one night ago, or 2 nights ago, from South Africa. She went with a group from her school. She graduated early from NYU.
She's 21.
She's 21, and she spent several months in Spain. Is that correct, Bobby? With NYU program. And then she got on the plane after graduating early, and she flew to South Africa about 2 weeks ago. Wonderful, wonderful experience, and having all of the NYU professors with her. Excuse me, she just landed 2 days ago, and when she landed, she went and bought some gloves, and that night she took a bus to Washington for the inaugural.
For the inauguration of Barack Obama.
Right.
That is very special. And then David.
Well, David is very special because he's our only son, and he had great, great talent as a child. And I remember this when we sent him to the Lamplighter School. We gave him flashcards, and he knew the answer to everything on the flashcard. And what it was, if you looked on the back of the card, The answer was the reciprocal, what was on the front of the card. Now, how he figured that out is beyond me. And so the teacher put the same thing on the blackboard. He couldn't do a thing with it, but he figured that out. And he only spent 1 year there, but that was an interesting experience because he went from there to St. Mark's. And he was a famous debater at St. Mark's. He won the Harvard debate twice, which to that point had never been done before. And he went to Stanford, graduated Phi Beta Kappa with distinction, which is great. His great teacher was Condi Rice. And then he went to law school at the University of Texas, and he's become the senior real estate attorney here in town for K&L Gates, which is will be the largest law firm in the country. That's Bill Gates' father's law firm.
Formerly Hughes and Luce.
Hughes and Luce, yes.
And David is married.
Yes, to Julie Ray, and we have 2 children there, grandchildren, I should say. We have Elizabeth Hope Fields, and we have Andrew Morris Fields, with Morris named after MB. And Elizabeth just got into Brandeis. She's very excited about that. And Andrew is a nice athlete and a very, very good scholar too.
And a wonderful soul.
Yeah, and when he had a choice of language to take, he took Latin, which is very hard. And he loves that. So he has an interesting mind. And we're just extremely happy with him.
And my husband and children.
Okay, well, Sheryl has gone through a lot in her lifetime and was married to Tom Fallick and had 2 girls. And unfortunately, the girls had learning disabilities, but they're very happy where they are today.
And their names?
We have Emily and Jennifer, and they were just with us. They try to spend time with us, but it's hard to have them away from school too often. But they're just terrific kids, and for their abilities, they're doing very well. And Cheryl's married now to Gordon Bogan, and she's very happy. Gordon is very intellectual, which is good. Cheryl's equal in that, and an avid reader, and has 2 wonderful sons, which have become her sons.
And their names are?
We have Caleb and Joseph.
Great. Well, I think that's important to know because I think everyone likes to know about your family life. And even though you were traveling a lot for work and busy with work and raising your family, you've still managed to find time to be part of the community. You've had some experiences in addition to the hospital with being able to really make a difference. Tell us a little bit about how you met Leonard Hausman.
Oh, that's an interesting story.
And tell us who Leonard Hausman is.
Very, very dear friend of mine. He was a professor and a PhD at Brandeis. And Dr. Sacker, who headed Brandeis, came to us one day. We had started a program, really Donnie was instrumental in that, called TYP, Transitional Year Program, where we took kids out of the ghetto and gave them a year of remedial education so they could matriculate in one of the Ivy League schools. And during the 60s, I guess it was, when they had the sit-ins at Brandeis, those were mostly the Zale Scholarship students that did that. So Dr.
How did you feel about that at the time?
Oh, it didn't bother me because that was a thing to do on campus.
Okay.
And so Dr. Sacker paid us a visit, and he said, "You owe us a big favor." And I said, "Uh-oh, knuckleball, what do we owe you a favor about?" And he started telling us about all these kids. It gave him a lot of problems. He said, "I want to try something that's even more radical than that. I want to bring Arabs and Israelis to the Brandeis campus." And so...
and this was in the 1970s, late 70s, early 80s?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And MB said, "Okay, I'll give you an initial gift of $25,000 if Leo will do the work." Mm-hmm. I said, "MB, leave me alone. You've got all these things that you want me to do for you, and I just am exhausted."
But he, of all of his children, he knew that you were the one with the intellectual capacity to make this happen.
I have no idea why he picked me on that. And so anyway, I said, I'm going to take a month off and go to Nantucket and rest, because I'd just been on 2 very difficult acquisitions. And he said, well, Leonard Hausman's going to meet you there. So he came to Nantucket with his wife and his children, and it was love at first sight. And so I said I would help him. And so we started at Brandeis. I think it was called the Center for Social and Economic Policy in the Middle East, where we brought Arabs and Israelis to live together on campus and gave them a master's degree after 1 year. But they had to live together and become friends and so forth. And so the Dr. Sacker was replaced by a woman, I want to say it was maybe Evelyn Handler, I'm not for sure. And she was the president, and she didn't like what we were doing because John Sununu wanted to join our board. And I said, I think our umbrella should be big enough that anybody should join our board. And he wasn't very popular.
He was in government.
Yes, she was the governor of the state and had some bad feelings. John Sununu was quite radical. And so she kicked us off campus. And so Harvard took us, and we went to the John F. Kennedy School of Harvard. And that's where we did the program. First thing, Joe Califano was our chairman.
And tell us who Joe Califano was.
He's a famous person here in this country. He was Catholic, number one. We tried to pick out someone who wasn't Jewish and who wasn't Arab. And Joe Califano would just fit the bill.
He had been involved in the government.
Oh, yes. And he got John Cardinal O'Connor to give us $1 million to start this program.
Through the Catholic Church.
Near East Charities, that's correct. Marvelous gift of the Cardinal. And we visited with the Cardinal at his home on Madison Avenue.
In New York.
In New York. And so what we did is we got the very best professors from Harvard and from MIT. And we wrote a book which we called, I'm trying to think of it, it was under the Institute of the Center for Social and Economic Policy in the Middle East. And we did the plan for the West Bank, giving the Arabs 5 things to begin with: health, education, welfare, tourism, and the chartering of banks.
Chartering of banks.
Yes, that was because to get them involved in things that they could control. We left 3 things on the table: water, the return of refugees, and the status of Jerusalem. And so
those were things that you didn't discuss.
Well, we couldn't solve them immediately. So we got the best brains, Stanley Fisher, for example. I think he heads the World Bank now, or maybe the Israeli Bank.
So you brought fine people together,
yes,
to help with
the program.
The program.
Joe Califano, John Cardinal O'Connor, General Alexander Haig was the vice chairman. I was the vice chairman, and some other people. I can't remember all the names. So.
And did you meet overseas?
Well, I got a call. Mother and I were vacationing for the first time in Santa Fe. I got a call in the middle of the night. I have to be in Tunis, Tunisia, and in one day. So I was the leader of this particular group. I was a senior member of the group, and I flew to Boston, picked them up, and we flew to Zurich, and Zurich to wherever we went to at that time.
Tunisia.
Huh? Yeah.
To Tunisia.
Tunisia, right. And so we met with Yasser Arafat late at night. He likes to meet late at night. And everybody said, weren't you afraid? I said, no. Everybody around me had an AK-47. So why would I be afraid? And so we had the book, and we met with the Palestinian infrastructure. Some of them were very positive about it. Farouk Kadumi, the foreign minister, was totally against it. But they decided to sign the Declaration of Principles, which our government wanted them to do. And
the principles of the infrastructure.
Of the infrastructure, right. And 10 or 11 days later, they were in the Rose Garden of the White House, if you remember. I think it was Yitzhak Rabin, if I recall, and Yasser Arafat, and they shook hands on this.
This was with Jimmy Carter.
You have a better memory than I do. And the problems, let's talk about the problems. There wasn't any problem with health, education, welfare, tourism, and the taxation of banks. The problem was water. The Dutch government gave us $2 million to solve that problem. And the Israelis were growing bananas, which they could buy and grow roses instead. The Jordanians were giving the water to their farmers. We said charge for it because water is fungible. You put a price on it, it finds an equal level. And then that was one. The return of refugees, there's a historical way to handle that. You let so many thousands come in, which the Israelis have agreed to, and you give them each $35,000 or something to get started. And the status of Jerusalem, we said Jerusalem has to be split. Well, I became a piranha over that. You just couldn't take that. I said, well, it'll
Because
never...
the Israelis couldn't handle that?
Couldn't handle that, and the American Jews couldn't handle it.
Mhm.
This was very unpopular. And today I think most of them have come around to that viewpoint, that if you really want to have peace, and by the way, with water, there's no problem today. With the return of refugees, that has not been accepted yet, and Israel's made room for so many of them. And Jerusalem, everyone has come around to the fact you have to have a two-state solution if you really want peace.
Well, the Arabs live in East Jerusalem.
East Jerusalem, and then they have the West Bank. And so they'll work out the settlements and things like that. But what happened is Yasser Arafat changed his mind and started the first Intifada. And then you had the Israelis, which had really championed Hamas at the beginning, thinking that that was someone they could lean upon instead of Fatah. Fatah was the one that they really should have put all the emphasis on. And so you see what's happened. And they absolutely will not accept peace at all. They look for the destruction of the Jews, and they want the whole of Israel today, Greater Israel, whatever it's called.
So did your group disband?
Well, Harvard kicked us off campus too, but not because of what we did. The Harvard people wanted to work with the Russians, if you recall, and the wives of some of the people that went over there teaching them how to run a democracy or investing in these companies. And Joe Nye, the dean, couldn't stand that, so he kicked them both off campus, which was a terrible mistake.
And what's happened with the group, with your group?
Well, it's continues, number one. And they've gone into now nursing. They've created a nursing program for people from India, from Bangladesh. And I can't tell you all the background because it's not for release, but they've been accepted in the Middle East.
So they've changed their focus.
They've changed the focus because, for example, Leonard went to Abu Dhabi and he got them to accept a branch of NYU. He did the seminal research on that. And the head of Abu Dhabi gave him $50 million, but wouldn't acknowledge that we played a part of it. But the story broke in the New York Times on the front page, and America Higher Education was mentioned at that as someone who submitted the idea. Now, others today, other countries want campuses today. The main thing today is they're looking for education, and they really need education. And so all these great American universities are starting campuses abroad.
How did you develop your philosophy, Dad?
It just came to me naturally.
What are some of the sayings that you have shared?
Well, can you
with
bring me
your children?
the piece?
Well, I can do that, but I think you can tell us some of them.
I can't remember. The first thing I told them is,
It's the most-
to me, the most important thing to teach my children is from the famous sermon, I place before you this day good and evil, and life and death. Choose good, not evil, and choose life,
No.
and choose good. And I've tried to inculcate this in my grandchildren and my children. It's the simplest thing in the world, that philosophy, when you think about it. Choose life and do good, and that's all I ask of them.
It gets down to just the most basic precepts, and if you hold on to that,
Well, I tell them other things too. I said the meek will not inherit the earth. And Sheryl, you got my sayings back there. They put them on glass, etched them in glass.
Well, we'll look at
I
that.
hope they'll look at it someday.
We'll look at that in just a little while. How do you see that Dallas has changed over the years that you've lived here?
Well, I think it's become much more hospitable to Jewish people, for example. And I remember when Curtis Meadows, if you recall, met with the Zale Foundation and said we shouldn't just look inward, we should look outward. What we can do for South Dallas to make the people feel like they're part of the community and so forth. And he was an inspirational leader, by the way. And
But you were part of working with MB and being one of the first to recognize that segregation was wrong and to help integrate Dallas, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah, well, I tell you, we helped from Jimmy Aston.
Who
was
was
the head.
Jimmy Aston?
He was the head of the Republic Bank, and he did the same things we did, but he didn't want to be on the end of a limb without us. In other words, the bank would get a lot of criticism unless the Zell Foundation joined them, which they did. And if you notice Dallas people like Sam Bloom, for example, we never had a problem with integration of the eating counters here. We didn't have those things. We decided as a mature city, we didn't want to fight this out on the doorsteps of the school. And we had marvelous leadership in those days.
How do you see that the Dallas Jewish community has changed over the years?
Well, I think one important thing is they become more religious, particularly Temple Emmanuel, and I think it's wonderful. Now, the old Germanic Jews that started it, I think a lot of them are offended and want to use the old prayer book. But just go to services on Friday at 6:30 services, and hear all the singing and chanting in Hebrew and everything. It's the right thing for the kids today. Maybe not for my generation, but it's been well accepted.
You've been involved with seniors, the Dallas Jewish seniors. Tell us a little bit about what you've done. I guess it started with Golden Acres and then it moved to the Legacy.
Well, that's interesting, Sheryl, because I went many years ago to the dedication of a building out there, and I remember what Levi Olin said. And he said, the challenge is how you take care of the old, not the young. You're obligated to take care of the young. You're not obligated to take care of the old. And getting older, I appreciate that. And so they elected me the chairperson of the Dallas Home for Jewish Age Foundation. And you'll take a look at the line they gave me. I spent about 10 or 12 years there.
And what was the foundation for the Dallas Home for the Aged?
Well, they had collected money over the years, and we built it up to about $12 million or so through good investing and so forth. And I remember the help I got from a lot of people, particularly Ed Hoffman, for example. He was a great believer in equities, and equities made a lot of money for us. And so about, how many years ago? 6, 7 years ago, they brought me, as the head of the foundation, they brought me a piece of property to buy, which cost about $6.5 million. And we didn't have the money, but we had stocks and bonds, and I said, we'll sell all of our stocks. Now, fortuitously, the market broke. I shouldn't say fortuitously, but it broke 2 months later. But we had ours in cash, so we paid about $6.5 million for the marvelous piece of land in Plano. And my thinking on that was they couldn't go to East Dallas again. They couldn't go to West Dallas. They couldn't go to South Dallas. The only place that they could expand would be to the north. That's where the Jewish population was going. So we bought that piece of land. It took them about 3 years to come up with the planning. I had nothing to do with the planning. They did a wonderful job of that. And I sat on all the committees as an advisor because I didn't have time to give the time to all of them, you know. And they've done a marvelous job. And we borrowed, I think, $90-some odd million. We raised with the land maybe 18 or 19 million because they sold the old Golden Acres. And they took on a lot, but it's been very successful. And it will continue to be successful because that's the path of growth in the community. And I didn't want them to make the same mistake that they made back when they went to East Dallas.
You know, one of the things that we haven't spoken about, you're talking about your investments, you left the family business, and in the 1980s, the late 80s, and then you started a new business. Tell us about that phase in your life that you're still in now.
I didn't plan to go back into business, and this was simply a lark for me. One of my friends came to me and said, I inherited $3 million. Will you pay off the estate and manage the money? I said, okay, I'll take you on. And then with that, never advertised a bit. Alex Weisberg joined me, and that's another story. And then I hired a nice young man 12 or 15 years ago, Michael Kane, who, another story, hired him. And we built a nice business up, very difficult today,
Weisberg and Fields.
Weisberg and Fields, and we will soon merge it with another company.
And you've been investment advisors.
I had to go to school and become an investment advisor. And it's worked out very well for the clients, although it's very challenging times. We've never been through a recession like this before. And let's hope we can get rid of it and not go into a depression, which is possible, and inflation.
So you could have never imagined that you would leave the jewelry business and have a very fulfilling second career?
Well, I have to go back when I was in junior high school when they introduced me to stocks. And I picked out the highest priced stock on the New York Stock Exchange. And it was Allied Chemical Company in those days. And then when I came to Dallas, MB said he wanted me to invest for him. And that was my first chance to put his money to work. And then, of course, I took a course on investment at Columbia. And I was chairman of the investment committee at Brandeis for a year or so. So I had good training. But at this point now, I'm looking forward to some kind of retirement in the next couple of years when I get old.
When you get old, isn't that wonderful? Well, from what I can tell, you seem to still want to jump out of bed every morning and get to the office.
Well, not to 5:45 though.
You know, as we're getting ready to wind up our interview, before we head over to look at some of the memorabilia that you have so graciously arranged for us to see, what are some of the things that you're most proud of as you reflect back over these years?
Well, of course, marrying mother is one thing. And two, the relationship that I had with Morris and Enda, and Marvin, Donnie, and Gloria. They've opened their heart to me and taken me in as if I were their own brother. And I truly appreciate that because I'm difficult to handle. You're bringing in an odd person, you know, into a family group. And they've been absolutely marvelous to me, as close as any brother or sister could be.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's a tremendous tribute to you that one of your children would be selected as the first chairman of our family foundation.
Makes me very proud of you.
Well,
They won't even let you off the board now. They're keeping you on for another 2 years.
This question, who are your role models?
Well, my role models are very interesting. Of course, MB and Enda, role models. Ben Lipshy was a role model.
And tell us a little bit more about Ben Lipshy. You alluded to him earlier. He was your mother's brother, Mamie, and also Edna's brother.
Right.
And tell
someone else, just the
us,
members of the family. Ben was marvelous to me, and also was a mentor. Goldie Persky, another one of the sisters, was like a mother to me. Took care of me like she took care of Marcy.
Marcy, of her only child, Marcy.
Right. Who else has been a mentor to me? I think that's about the family. Sid Lipshy was marvelous to work with. He died much too young.
So another one of the Lipshy brothers.
Right. So Harry I wasn't very close to, and Bernie was not one we could associate with.
Well, Bernie had Down syndrome.
Down syndrome, right.
But what you're saying is that you look back to the family as your role models, as the people that were inspiring to you.
Then and now.
As you're reflecting over what we've talked about this evening, is there anything that you'd like to add right now?
Well, I've been the luckiest person in the world to have found my life, my eternal wife, and I take great care of her. And we've had 55 glorious years together. Probably not one thing ever came between us.
Well, you've certainly set the example that all of your children have tried to follow in their own lives.
Well, as I told you earlier,
marriage.
The best thing you can do for your children is love their mother, and I truly believe that. And I think our family has learned that lesson.
On that very lovely note, we're going to turn off the tape and we're going to move over to the other room.
Good. Prague, Czech Republic. And Bobby and I were there 2 years ago, and this is in front of the hotel, and we thought it was just a nice picture.
Okay, you're all,
Okay.
okay, and
Yeah.
the book I'm gonna do.
The first lecture that Bobby and I sponsored, and I had made a speech, which Edna really appreciated. I said, we were pleased that Dr. Holt would initiate the first Edna and Marzale lectureship in pediatrics. Dr. Holt, Barbara, and I plan to attend the lecture in hopes that when you discuss protein nutrition, we will learn how to get our 3.5-year-old son David to eat. As I analyze my reasons for establishing this lectureship, I find that I'm indebted to 4 people whose deeds and words have altered my life. The first 2 are Edna and Marzale, whose deeds set the example. They raised me as if I were their own son, and as a child can never repay his parents' love, he can only carry on their good works. Third, I'm indebted to my wife Barbara, with whom I shared hopes and dreams and prayers in this very hospital, and in losing, learned life's true meaning. And lastly, there's Levi Owen, whose great ideas from the Talmud have finally begun to sink in. As Levi said last night, one must make an effort, and Barbara and I hope that our token effort will bring our children's hospital, our wonderful medical school, and our dedicated doctors a step closer.
I think that was supposed to be a pretty city, so I think we're okay.
This a little memento here, giving me back the things that I've taught them. Choose life, not death, good, not evil. It's your duty to hope. It's your duty to act. 99% of our greatest fears never come true. The meek do not inherit the earth, and learn to cope.
And let's do the lion.
Work on the Dallas Home for Jewish Age Foundation after serving 12 years as their chairman. It's a very lovely gift, and I won't read what they wrote, but they wrote some very nice things about me.
I got his chat, I got his mirror.
Very popular when I came back with this picture to the States, but this is the time I met with Yasser Arafat and his group and asked him to sign the Declaration of Principles, which his group did sign, and which 10 days later he was in the Rose Garden of the White House shaking Yasser Arafat's hand with Yitzhak Rabin. And I hoped at that time that we were on the road to peace, but I'm afraid it has a long ways to go, if ever.
Good, thank you. Perfect.
Do you want to choose?
This is a very interesting book because I was flying on the plane from New York to Schenectady, and that was the day after Bobby Kennedy was shot. And the man next to me told me he was a physician, and I asked him, did I think, would Robert Kennedy pull through? He said no. He was shot in the medulla oblongata, and you couldn't recover from that. And I asked him, after he went to Schenectady, I asked him to come to New York with me and meet MB because he needed money to complete his studies. And he wrote in the book that MB treated him very kindly, but he said, young man, work hard and you'll get the money. So I couldn't tolerate that, and on the way downstairs, I told him that I would give him the money. I frankly forgot how much I gave him until I got this book from Norman Kaplan. Dr. Kaplan wrote me how nice it was of me to give him the money. And he said I gave him $15,000 a year for 2 years. I didn't tell Bobby about it though. But anyway, it's so nice. And he wrote me this book with this wonderful inscription. And he said, to Mr. Leo Fields, dear Leo, let me again thank you for your generous grant support back in 1968. It made a great difference and enabled me to pursue my research ideas. Read paragraphs, pages 87 to 91. All the best. And he signed it, Steve O. Julius. Now, Steve O. Julius did his first book. He was a partisan in Yugoslavia against the Germans. And he gave me this first book back in 2005. And this one I didn't know about till Norman Kaplan read it. And he devoted about 8 or 10 pages to me in the book and how I gave him the money. And frankly, I'm glad I've done it. And I just did it again the other day with a doctor who I met through someone on the plane, who I'm bringing to Southwestern Medical School, Dr. Maurizio Bendandin, who's an expert in creating a vaccine from your cells against lymphoma. And the medical school finally has taken him in. And let's hope he writes a book someday.
Perfect.
Unbelievable. Your memory is beyond.
Marvin and I were living in Europe. We got a chance to save one of our relatives who was a DP person, displaced person. And here's a picture of Leo Fields, Edna Zale, and Marvin Zale found their cousin, Mike Corman, in Eschwege, a camp for displaced persons in Germany, and brought him to America in 1948.
Show us the picture.
And so here's a picture of Mike, who was living in a one-room barracks. Didn't have a stove. They had just a little heater on the counter and very little food to eat. And he and his wife and his baby girl we brought to America, and he became a manager in a Zale store. Mike Corman. And this book was written by someone at Temple Emmanuel, Jerry Crystal. They called it The Light in the Prairie.
Perfect.
And I didn't know she was doing that.
Yeah.
The first one shows me at a very young age, horseback. They used to bring these horses around in Wichita Falls, and they took my picture. This is a picture of me in a Cub Scout uniform, and that also is in Wichita Falls. So I was about 12 years old at the time.
Tell us about this one down here. That was your Korean service?
That's a picture of me. Take a look at it right here. This picture was taken after I left Korea. This is on the island of Hokkaido, the northernmost island of the Kurils. And this is at Noborobetsu. And they got a picture of me as I went to this resort for a little R&R.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, 80 has never looked so young. Thank you.
Thank you all so much.